to rumble. Schilling Show Unleashed on the Seven Thunders Media Network. Former city councilor, husband, father, and community watchdog. Your host, Rob Schilling.
Hey, a special Facebook Live edition of the Schilling Show Unleashed Podcast. And thank you so much for joining me here and taking the time to watch this. It is incredibly important what's been reported this morning regarding the local transportation provider called JAUNT. Corruption, a cover-up, Brad Sheffield, the CEO, making disparaging statements against your host here, Rob Schilling. We'll get to that in just a minute. Don't forget you can support us by visiting shillingshow.com and clicking on the Patreon button. I value your support, and there's no way we can do investigative journalism like this without you. Let's jump into the topic at hand. And you see, this is an echo of something that took place, maybe 10 years ago or so, when I did an in-depth one-year investigation into Rick Barrick at Charlottesville City Hall, a bid rigging cover-up investigation that eventually ended up in that guy losing his position, the late Rick Barrick, I should say, with all due respect. This host and the Schilling Show Unleashed, we have lots of experience in investigative reporting. Nobody pays me to do this, but I don't like seeing corruption in the local community, which is why I decided to dig into JAUNT. So how did all of this get started? Well, one of our deputy community watchdogs gave me information that there were things going on at JAUNT, financial irregularities that shouldn't be, and there was some amount of detail in there, which we published with a disclaimer that we could not get proof of this. Within days of my publication of the information, just coincidentally, the CEO of JAUNT, Brad Sheffield, I sometimes refer to him as Brad Sheffieldello because he reminds me so much of a young Tom Perriello. He resigned, quote unquote, resigned his position as the CEO of JAUNT. I'm sure it's a very well-paid position. Well, we wanted to get more information, and so we asked our friends over at JAUNT, who receive virtually all of their money from you, the tax-paying suckers, to please provide us with some information on travel expenses and other oddities that we'd heard about. Let's see your audits. Let's see some emails. Let's just get this information out on the table. Jody Saunders, who's the spokesperson for JAUNT, very politely declined, but declined nonetheless. I contacted my good friend, attorney Matt Harden, the former Greene County Commonwealth's attorney and somebody who's helped me out over the years in suing localities and entities over the Freedom of Information Act in Virginia. You cannot withhold this sort of information. Now, JAUNT made a very interesting claim. They claimed that they weren't a publicly funded entity, which anybody would laugh their head off, but then they hired a very high-priced law firm to come in and defend them. It wasn't the standard firm that they have on retainer, but they hired a very expensive law firm. I would imagine they bill up to maybe $600, $700, $800, maybe $1,000 an hour to defend against Matt Harden and Rob Schilling in trying to get the information opened up so the public can see what's going on at JAUNT. Well, we had a court battle with them. It went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and the judge ultimately decided that JAUNT had absolutely no way to plausibly deny that they were a publicly funded entity and that the information could be made public. Well, we haven't quite reached settlement with JAUNT yet, but I think that's probably forthcoming. The judge's ruling has been published online at shillingshow.com, so anybody can read what Judge Cortrara had to say about this. In the meantime, what happened? Well, as soon as the ruling came in, there was behind-the-scenes negotiation between Matt Harden and the high-priced, expensive attorneys representing JAUNT that you're paying for. And then all of a sudden this morning, a press release came out. Again, mind you, that Brad Sheffield resigned from JAUNT back in December. And here was the statement that was made by JAUNT, trying to hide this, trying to cover it up, trying to keep you, the listening public, from knowing what's going on with your tax dollars. This is what was said by JAUNT's Jody Saunders in the Daily Newspaper on December 9th. Here we go. Brad has done a lot to move JAUNT forward and make it the successful community partner that it is today. I love this phrase here. I think we're really grateful for his leadership. That was amazing. He left it in a good place, and I think we're in really good hands with Karen picking up where Brad left off, and that's the interim CEO. So you could tell right there that something was drastically wrong when she, Jody Saunders, has to say, I think we're really grateful for Brad Sheffield's service. They were hedging their bets. So what does the statement that was finally released by JAUNT today have to say after they were forced to come clean with what they were trying to hide, the dirty deeds they were trying to hide? Here's what they said today. Statement coming from JAUNT this morning. The findings of the audits of both JAUNT's financial statement and federal awards concluded that the CEO, that would be Brad Sheffield, purchased numerous expenses for goods, services, and travel, which violated internal control policies of the corporation. Wow. While not unlawful nor a prohibited use of government funds, the auditors determined that the expenditures were beyond what would have normally been expected for reasonable business expenses. Wow, that sounds pretty bad. Now, here's what they did. JAUNT's board, these are the people that oversee Brad Sheffield, felt that they were no longer comfortable with the business judgment of then CEO Brad Sheffield, and on December 5th, the board made the difficult decision, and this is before the audit findings were completed. The board made what they call a difficult decision to request Mr. Sheffield's resignation. In other words, they said, get out the door or we'll let you go. Demonstrating tremendous leadership and integrity. That's the board, not Brad Sheffield. And Mr. Sheffield tendered his resignation on December 7th. So this is the long backstory of where we are today. Now, very interestingly, Brad Sheffield decided in Rick Barrick fashion, the late Rick Barrick, to attack the messenger, to kill the messenger, and he hired Susan Payne, I think they're called the Blue Ridge Group, to write, I'm sure he paid her hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, to write the following press release. Well, this is excerpted here. You can see the whole thing online. It's unfortunate that my tenure as executive director of JAUNT has been misinterpreted. By whom? By the auditors that are paid so much money? By the JAUNT board of directors? They misinterpreted it? He says, I've heard some criticism. This is Brad Sheffield speaking now. I've heard some criticism of my tenure from radio hosts. Now, I know he's talking about me, but I don't know what other radio host has been critical of him. And here's what, this is so funny. Brad Sheffield says, radio hosts with no business experience. Actually, Brad Sheffield, I have a business degree, a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration, and have been running businesses ever since before I graduated from college. I have more business experience than you do. But you see, you just like to hide the truth, don't you? He goes on to say, I think that rather than listening to shock jocks, and that's a wonderful term because shock jock, isn't that like Howard Stern and Don Imus and all that? That term hasn't really been in vogue since the 1990s. So, Susan Payne, you're showing your age here. Rather than listening to shock jocks who've never had to meet a payroll, our citizens should look at the facts. Well, that's what I tried to do with my FOIA request, except you and JAUNT didn't want to let the facts out. All expenses during my tenure, including travel, adhered to JAUNT's policies, and all expenses were reviewed prior to authorization. Well, you know what? When the expenses come out, and we intend to release them, when we find out what was actually being spent and why JAUNT felt so bad about Brad Sheffield that they could no longer trust him, I will share all of those with the public. I'm surprised Brad Sheffield, who wants transparency here, didn't share the expenses that are in question with you, the public. Of course he didn't. He's hoping they never come out. He concludes here, it's no secret that some of those criticizing me would love to see JAUNT abolished entirely. We're better than that. I have no idea what Susan Payne is saying, or what Brad Sheffield is saying through Susan Payne. No one ever said anything about abolishing JAUNT entirely, so I don't know who he's talking about. But when he says we're better than that, well, I don't think you're better than that because JAUNT's going to suffer a lot from the things that you did and didn't do, things that were improper that caused JAUNT to say, goodbye, Brad Sheffield. Here's the door. Don't let it hit you on the way out. Don't forget, The Schilling Show is online at schillingshow.com. Share this with your friends. Support us on Patreon. You know, there's nobody in this community doing investigative journalism like this. We're going to keep at it. Thank you so much for joining us today on this very special Facebook Live production. And we'll see you soon on The Schilling Show and The Schilling Show Unleashed podcast.